So this is Stereoactive Presents. And in this episode, we will be remembering David Lynch, paying tribute to him. In just a little bit, I will be joined by Mike Miley, the author of a new book called David Lynch's American Dreamscape, Music, Literature, Cinema, which will be released on February 6th by Bloomsbury Academic. We will also hear from a few friends of the podcast who were kind enough to share their thoughts on David Lynch in the days after his passing. And that's pretty much the game here. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVeigh. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I'm really happy to be here.
I'll just say real quick that I learned about David Lynch's death from a friend's post on Blue Sky, and immediately started seeing so many more posts from people sharing their love of Lynch and his work. And a post of yours was actually among the first I saw in that initial flood. And it said this: "He's given us our mantra, fix your hearts or die." And it wasn't actually a quote I knew yet, because I believe it's from Twin Peaks: The Return, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which I haven't yet watched.
Oh man,
it's in my future. It's coming up.
Yeah,
but the words still hit me pretty hard and seemed, unfortunately, I suppose, perfectly tailored to our current moment, if that makes sense. So, I guess my first question is, what about those words, "fix your heart or die," struck you and made you want to share them in that moment, if you don't mind sharing?
So the context of the quote is in Twin Peaks: The Return, David Duchovny plays a transgender FBI agent and played one in the I think the second season of the original run of Twin Peaks as well. And so it's something where Lynch's character Gordon Cole is reminiscing to Denise about how Cole sort of silenced other people in the bureau who were not as accepting of Denise, and that he told these clown comics, "Fix your hearts or die," I think is the exact quote. And so it's, of course, in recent years, this has been a quote that's been circulating a lot more from Twin Peaks: The Return. And I thought it's the first thing that sort of popped into my head, not just for its immediate context of the line itself in the show, but just how that really seems to broaden itself to talk about all of Lynch's work and what's kind of at the heart of it. I thought it was a really interesting but not obvious way to read a lot of what his work has to say. I mean, whether that's obviously something like The Elephant Man or The Straight Story, that I think are very much telling that kind of story, but it's also the story of Lost Highway and the story of Mulholland Drive, and I guess very deeply the message of Wild at Heart, where at the end of Wild at Heart you see someone fix his heart and live, right? But I think it's there in all of the work if you want to see it. And it seemed like, for all of the press and stuff that Lynch gets for being weird and dark and disturbing and all of that sort of stuff, the core of the work is incredibly affirmative and calling out to viewers to pursue a better way of living in some way or another, because basically that's the only way we're going to get through any of this sort of stuff, right? And so that just sort of stood out to me at the time, like, going into the weekend we were about to go into, like, okay, this is the this is the thing I need to remember. This is the thing I need to keep telling myself. And so, yeah, I wanted to put it out there in that way, just for to, I guess, center that statement and get people to think about it in its immediate context in the show, but also just to think about how that's what all of the work is doing.
Yeah, and I guess maybe just for any listeners who may be coming across this way in the future, just to give a bit of context, David Lynch passed away in the days just before Donald Trump's second inauguration, and a lot of folks, especially marginalized folks or people who are vulnerable for certain reasons, they are feeling vulnerable. To that point, pretty quickly after I saw your initial sharing of that, I saw other people sharing it too, and someone shared that clip that you referred to of Lynch's character in The Return speaking to Duchovny's character, who is trans. And so it can be a clear mantra for trans folks, but like there's so much going on right now, I think, that in the world that unfortunately it could be attached to thematically.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I appreciated seeing the quote there and learning it, and I'm looking forward to getting to it because as we'll get to in a little bit. But so I wanted to back up for just a moment, though. I am curious. Can you remember your first encounter with Lynch's work, and what was it? What was it? What work was it, and how did you react?
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I think you'll like, being from Lafayette, I think you'll like certain details of this story as well. I'm pretty certain my first encounter was seeing Dune in its original theatrical release when I was like 5 years old, and I think it was playing at the Acadiana Mall. I remember that Acadiana Mall theater, that like 5 screen that they had in the mall there near the food court. And there's the moment kind of early on when Baron Harkonnen like pulls the heart plug out of one of his servants or something like that, and kills the person, and then like levitates in the air and starts oozing stuff out of every pore. And I just remember, I have a memory of sitting in my Aunt Anne's lap and running out of the theater at that point, I'm out of here. But I don't remember if I went back into the theater or not, or if that was it. But that, I remember that poster being such a big deal to me, like just sort of capturing my imagination. I was always sort of into Dune and thought that was really cool. But that's my first encounter, and then eventually watching the whole thing at some point, afterward on home video. And that's probably the one that I had seen until probably seeing like The Elephant Man in 6th grade or something like that. I kind of remember seeing that movie around that time, and that having a really big emotional impact on me. And then from there, I think that was close to around the time Twin Peaks came out. I didn't watch Twin Peaks in its initial run, but it was something I was definitely aware of the adults being into, and the whole who killed Laura Palmer thing. It was still pretty fresh on remembering people being into Who Shot JR on Dallas a few years earlier. So it seemed like, oh, okay, this is what television show. People get really into some big question on a TV show, and they got to show up every week to find out. So yeah, that was and then by the time I was in, I guess, freshman year of high school, and I was really deep into getting into movies and stuff like that, that's probably around the time that I would have seen Blue Velvet or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, just for my part, I think my first encounter with Lynch's work must have been either Blue Velvet or The Elephant Man. I'm not sure which. I have clear memories of watching The Elephant Man. I don't have a clear memory of watching Blue Velvet for the first time anymore, but I know I watched it in that initial run like you had of getting into movies when I was in high school and just trying to seek out everything I could. I don't know which was first. Not that it matters, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think each offers a completely different entryway, though, so maybe it does matter in a way. I do remember Twin Peaks as a phenomena that was happening. I didn't understand what it was. My parents didn't watch it. I don't think I ever saw any of it until I was older. But I do remember somehow that filtering down to me as a, I guess, 10-year-old when it originally ran on ABC. It was a different time, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then of course, trying once you knew, oh, wait, he did this show that I heard everybody talking about when I was
Yeah.
younger. Now, how do I find the show?
Right.
And trying to figure out which video stores carried copies of the series. And generally, I think all that was around growing up at the time was just that tape of the pilot episode.
Mhm.
That I was able to rent, and then the rest of it was to see the show. I had to save up money to buy like the box set of
Yeah.
VHS tapes from the store. So you're buying the whole run of the show sight unseen, basically, just to be able to see it.
Yeah.
And that's how I think I spent like a month of my junior year of high school was just watching Twin Peaks at every moment I could.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely remember that being a staple of dorm rooms too. When I went to college, of certain kids having that box set of VHS tapes, and just that was their thing. They were watching it and then starting over again, which I get. I just, for some reason, it didn't connect with me at the time, but later on it would. But
yeah, but I guess there were a few of those, like Lost Highway probably being another big kind of dorm roomy type staple, because it's the kind of movie that you put on for a different person every weekend and just stay up all night trying to figure out what you just saw. And I think I did that at least 3 weekends in a row once it had finally come out on video, because it never played in Lafayette. So it was something where, a year later you're trying to get a hold of like the one copy in town to watch with people.
Yeah, it definitely didn't play in Lafayette. I remember seeing it listed the year it came out. What was it, 97 maybe? And I even saw like Siskel and Ebert review it, which was like my window into the wider world of cinema at the time, of just like being, I remember watching Siskel and Ebert every week and being like, is that movie ever going to open in Lafayette? Which, for context for people, again, is the town where both Mike and I grew up. We didn't know each other growing up, but kind of connected recently, and that's why we're having this conversation now.
Yeah, because I guess in the Ebert stuff, I mean, Ebert was always very scathing toward Lynch, with a couple of exceptions, until I guess Straight Story and Mulholland Drive, and then he really pulls a bit of a 180 on him. And I remember kind of going through, you'd have to go through and read all of those bits of criticism about them. You'd read so many pieces about a movie before you actually saw it. He was kind of unsparing, and particularly on Blue Velvet, I think. He really doesn't care for that movie very much. But the arguments are all really interesting, and that's kind of the cool part about digging into all of that. But then, of course, I think my favorite bit of movie advertising of all time is that print ad that the producers of Lost Highway took out after the Siskel and Ebert 2 thumbs down, right? 2 more reasons to go see Lost Highway. I mean, that's the kind of brilliant thing that you can only really do once, because after that, then you're just kind of copying it from everybody else. But man, what a brilliant move.
Yeah. And I guess it worked too, because Lost Highway, I feel like, was not generally received well by critics, not just Siskel and Ebert at the time that it was released. And I feel like there's been a whole reclamation project for that movie in recent years, especially as part of his overall body of work.
Yeah. And really his whole 90s output. It's kind of hard to realize and remember that in the 90s, he kind of goes from being king of the world in 1990 on the cover of Time magazine, has a Palme d'Or at Cannes and all of that. And basically by the end of 1991, and certainly into 92, when Firewalk with Me comes out, he is kind of persona non grata in all of the circles he was once in. And it's not really until Mulholland Drive that he sort of returns to the position that we view him in now. But the 90s were not a good, even though he was doing fantastic work, just not a good time for him necessarily. I guess The Straight Story gets a decent amount of acclaim for Farnsworth's performance, but even still, that one is underappreciated even by his fans, just because it is apparently not Lynchian, right? It's G-rated and all of that, and produced by Disney and all that kind of stuff. But it's as Lynchian as anything else is there. You just got to look at it a little differently, but it's all there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that the '90s work is severely underappreciated, even now. But at the time, yeah, it was like when Lost Highway came out. It's even though it was only 5 years since he had made a movie, it really was kind of like, oh, this is his comeback. This is where's he been? He had been memory hold in a lot of ways, but then you had people like you and me who had been in that meantime growing up, like catching up with him,
Yeah, totally.
on home video, and and all of us were very ready for Lost Highway, where maybe the people who hadn't just crammed all of his work into a 3-year period, they weren't ready for it in the same way.
Now let's hear from a friend of the podcast with their thoughts on David Lynch, and we'll hear more of my discussion with Mike Miley after that.
Hi, I'm Matt Tyson. I'm a filmmaker, documentary, industrial, and soon to be my first narrative feature film. And David Lynch had an immense impact and influence on my life and career. I could talk extemporaneously about the first time I saw Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart and had my head cracked wide open, or the first time I saw Twin Peaks, which was when it first aired on television, and became obsessed, or waiting in line on opening night for Lost Highway, or falling in love with Mulholland Drive, which is easily in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. But I've written a little something to get my thoughts together about the man, the legend, David Lynch. David Lynch mined the darkness at the edge of suburbia. He traversed the universe and charted the bizarre within the ordinary. He was a singular artist, one who created his own lexicon to plumb the duality of, quote, Americana, white picket fences, classic cars, syrupy pop songs, apple, cherry, pie, but then also the other side of that coin, the strange and the sinister, the darkness that lurks behind the veil of what we see and remember as the way things really are. His work so often overtly relying on vibe upon vibe, the wizardry of sound and image moving the audience through abstraction that felt real and thoroughly surreal. The haze of nostalgia viewed with 20/20 vision, neither sentimental nor cynical, a hopeful wade into the murky depths of mood, evocation, dreams, and nightmares. His influence on art and culture in the past 50 years is absolutely towering, a shadow cast down upon our realm in the form of an adjective that will live on for centuries in describing the best liminal tales of the mundane, Lynchian.
And now back to my chat with Mike Miley. After Lynch's passing was announced, so many people immediately started revisiting his work as a way of celebrating and remembering him and his impact. So I'm just curious, is there a particular work you sought out first after hearing of Lynch's death?
I didn't. And I think part of that was more just the circumstances of, so the first thing of his I saw after was Fire Walk with Me yesterday. A local movie theater here in town played Fire Walk with Me, Mulholland Drive, and Blue Velvet. And so I watched those last night. And so I didn't necessarily get to I guess with 3 kids at home over a long weekend, and then getting snowed in with 10 inches of snow in New Orleans for the first time since like 1895. It was a little harder to clear the deck and throw on Inland Empire or something like that. But I think and I'm trying to think in my head, could I put on the Straight Story on Disney Plus? Like, how long can I get away with just having that run in the house or something like that? But I think the thing I probably wanted to put on would have been Wild at Heart, just because it's just the most exuberant work of his. Or throw on The Elephant Man because I haven't seen it in a long time. The thing, because I don't talk about it in the book and stuff like that. So it's the one that I'm probably going to make my 10th grade English class watch it. Partly because it fits with the themes of the class that we're covering, but also just because I would like to watch it again and and spend more time with it. But yeah, so Fire Walk with Me wound up being the first one that I watched, and that was that's such a rough movie, and I mean that in a complimentary sense. It's so emotionally harrowing that it was a pretty impactful viewing experience to see it on a big screen, which I'm not sure I had done before. I think I've seen it on a big screen, but it's been a long time. And then to watch all the stuff that's put into that movie and all of the depth of feeling that is on display in that film, and then to think about how hated that movie was when it came out by me as well. I mean, when I finally saw it after watching Twin Peaks and saw that movie, I was like, what is this? I don't think this works. And part of me was like, they made him cut too much out of it. It's probably a good movie. I was doing my whole little director defending kind of thing. But then just over the years, continuing to revisit it, just think, dang, this movie is really, really good. And then going into, this might be his best movie. It's not my favorite, but I think it might be his supreme accomplishment as a filmmaker. I don't you've seen that one, right? Or
no, I haven't, because so my go-to after I heard was my wife and I started watching Twin Peaks together after we got our daughter down.
Nice.
So we've been watching an episode or two of that every night.
Okay, so where are you in it right now?
We are 2 or 3 episodes into season 2, and we've both seen chunks of it separately, but had never seen the whole thing, that whole first run. So we decided we wanted to revisit and finish it. And personally, I'm loving it more than I liked it the last time I tried to watch it. And it wasn't like I even stopped watching it before because I didn't like it. It was just didn't get around to finishing it,
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I'm loving it this time, and I'm really looking forward to finally being able to watch Fire Walk with Me and Twin Peaks: The Return, the Showtime show, when we're done with this ABC run, because I've never wanted to watch those having not finished the original run,
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to it, especially after the words you had about it just now. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, it is kind of, I'm sure you've heard this already, like how it both,
I know the gist of it, I do, but I haven't seen it though.
Like that one and The Return. I mean, what's fascinating about those works is, usually when an artist or anyone like revisits a work, it's just to kind of, let's take what we did before and like just do more of it.
Yeah.
And this is very much, every version of it is like interrogating the version before and or recontextualizing it or changing everything that's come before. And in an age of fan service, that really doesn't land well if people aren't prepared going in. Like, this is like not going to be finger snapping and cherry pie and like poodle skirts and stuff like that, right? It's going to be exactly what it says it is. It's the last week of Laura Palmer's life. It's not going to be a good ride. Like, the quirk is, some of the quirk is there, but it's very short in supply.
Yeah. And I guess like what seems interesting to me as sort of an outside spectator at this point, having not seen all 3 sort of iterations, or 4, I guess maybe you could say, because even the second season is a little different than the first, at least in terms of its goals, I would say. At least from what I understand, having still not seen all of it, but I feel like those all sort of like have variations on what people like about Lynch in a way, if that makes sense. And obviously they span different eras of his career and his work. So I feel like they get at the things that people like about him, which are like unique to every person, I feel like, you know? And actually I wanted to share something that's kind of related to that in my mind, at least.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine sent me her thoughts on Lynch the day after he passed. And this was from the email, something that struck me. So this is her words. In 2019, Lynch did an interview with Art Forum. He talked about how the moment of creating something is like a dream. It's something so mutually felt by humans. Even if you don't paint or write a song or deem yourself as a creator/creative, you know what a dream feels like, however one defines the word. So through his work, it's like Lynch had the ability to make everyone feel they were part of a moment of creation. No matter how batshit crazy the context was or the uncanny sense of time, it was like beautiful horror that's also funny. By the way, Andrea De Felice is the one who shared that with me, and I'll likely share more of that email later in the episode.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So the idea of his work as a kind of constant moment of creation that he's sharing, maybe even collaborating on with an audience, is really powerful to me. Have you ever thought of his work in that way?
I mean, I like the description there. So it makes me think of a couple of things. The first one is just the simple sort of, you don't have to necessarily understand his movies in order to feel them incredibly deeply. And in some ways, you might even feel them more because you don't understand them. And this is why, to the more collaborative nature of what that email says, that's why I think he's a notorious interview subject for never explaining anything, right? There's that whole meme, like, would you explain why Eraser is your most spiritual film? And he says, no. And because he says, like, once you tell somebody that, the dream stops. I think that's literally what he says in some quote. I think it's in the Lynch on Lynch interview books, like that once you have closure, the dream stops. And so this, what your friend is getting at is that participatory nature, almost that joint authorship between the viewer and Lynch, that he's putting some stuff out there. He's not sure how it all resolves. And that's not a statement of incompetence or anything like that, but it's rather just that is a statement of purpose. So the second thing it makes me think of is the way he would describe, and he's said this in interviews before, but he did a Q&A after a screening of Mulholland Drive that I was at, and he described it like the way he writes a movie is you have ideas, and you write ideas down on an index card. And once you get 60 or 70 ideas, you have a movie. And so it seems that what we're seeing in the film is the dreaming and working through of these ideas.
Yeah.
And he's not necessarily trying to rationalize, explain, or censor them in any way, but rather there's a complete faith that these ideas have a kind of power. And he's not certain exactly, like, if he could explain what that power was, he wouldn't have to make the movie, right? The movie is sort of like, I need to, but I think a lot of filmmakers do try to explain those things to themselves before they do them. And I genuinely think that he wouldn't explain them to other people because he hadn't explained it to himself either. It's just a complete faith in the power of these ideas, and he knows they resonate in some way. And so he's going to put it out there and not care if other people think it doesn't make sense or it doesn't resonate, because he's staying true to the idea. And so I think, and that's where, like what your friend's talking about, that's where we get to just tons and tons of feeling that we can't explain, which is also how we are with dreams. Right. Every dream that you've had, like you wake up and you think it's so profound to you, and then you start trying to explain it to someone, and you're like, oh wait, this is really stupid. Like I sound like an idiot right now, but I felt so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's essentially what I think Lynch's films are trying to keep us or prolong that dream state before we kind of sit down and try to explain them, which I realize is also a really ironic, weird thing to say, having just like written 250 pages explaining or doing things about Lynch's films. But I guess it's
no, I feel like that's just an extension of the idea.
I hope so. I mean, that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
Just more, just keep it going, right? There's more, like it's not an end point. I would hate to think that anyone would say like, oh, here's the definitive take on one of Lynch's movies.
Right.
And I think in general, like that would be a thing for all art. But at the same time, I think there probably are some artworks where you could maybe arrive at not the only take, but sort of a definitive kind of take. Like here's what's going on with this work. But the ones that I keep going back to, you get like, you can have 30 high quality takes, all of which can coexist, and on different days you're grooving with one of them more than the other, and none of them are so hermetically sealed off that they don't allow room for the others, and also that they don't offer total explanations, right? Like you can it's I don't, I used to, in the early days of the internet, you try to find all of the things you could, like people had written about, like Eraserhead or Lost Highway or whatever, and you'd get up to a point in reading those where like they're trying to explain the whole thing based on like the number 13, right? Or like, or something like that. It's like closing off every single loophole in the movie. And it's like, like, I don't care if the thing doesn't entirely work. Like, it's not a math problem, right? Like, I'm okay if there's like some remainders or whatever here, because those remainders are kind of what keeps it going, right? That's what kind of makes it interesting, because then you can just keep coming back to it and not resolve anything. And then that's a reason to get up in the morning. It's like, I'm going to see something new in this work of art today.
Yeah. He's not a puzzle box filmmaker.
Yeah,
like,
thank God, right?
Like Christopher Nolan or something, which I like Christopher Nolan. And I'm not like
people are going to come for you. The fanboys are coming for you, Jeremiah. Watch out.
I haven't always been the biggest Christopher Nolan fan, but I generally like his work. And I will admit that Interstellar, over the last 10 years, I hated it almost. Hate is maybe too strong a word, but I was not a huge fan of it when I first saw it. And I've really come around on it.
Okay.
And I don't know how much of that is because of the music. Just I thought the soundtrack was amazing from the start, and I listened to it over the years. And then the next time I went and watched the movie, I was like, I don't know if it's because all this music just resonates with me, but the whole thing is now resonating with me now too. And which honestly, now that I say that, I feel like I could maybe say the same about Twin Peaks. Of like, I've always loved the music, and I feel like maybe my experience of rewatching it now is enhanced by having that music sort of ingrained in me in a way that it wasn't the first time I tried to watch the show years ago. I do want to say though that like the thing about not being a puzzle box filmmaker where there is an answer and it's up to you to find it. Like that's what that means to me. And not going for that, there's like such a confidence and sort of clarity in the unclarity to his work. You have to be kind of fearless to put that out there and basically not be the guy trying to explain a dream and it comes off as dumb. Like, like it's so weird that he pulls that off almost every time, arguably every time, that he is essentially like sharing a dream with us. And we're not laughing at him and being like, please stop talking to me about this. Because that is the reaction you have when someone actually shares a dream with you.
No, I think confidence and bravery, I think I hadn't thought of it that way. I really like that because, to be able to say, well, where are we going? So I really don't know, but I'm going. and we're going to see what happens. We're going to see what happens when we get there,
Yeah.
wherever that might be, or we'll wind up somewhere else. I mean, that's
And if you want to come with me, let's do it.
Yeah, fine.
That's the thing with him.
Yeah, and I think that is a remarkable. You've got to be confident in yourself or in the idea to try to do that, versus thinking like, okay, I've got to have it all worked out. Got to slip people the answer at some point so that they know I know what I'm doing. And you can see in particular. I mean, I was thinking this last night again, watching Mulholland Drive, especially the first 2/3 of that with that Naomi Watts performance, just how it is walking on the thinnest line toward parody and camp. And, like it's a remarkably underrated performance because she has to play something that is so embarrassing to anyone who's like even remotely like slightly jaded, to just go with it like that and risk people laughing at you and thinking that, oh, God, this is so cheesy, this is so stupid, or even worse, assume, oh, you must be being ironic. You must not be serious. And I think that is often the first reaction that maybe some viewers will give Lynch's work. Oh, like this is a send up. He's making fun of this. He's joking. He's being ironic. And there are some elements maybe of that there, but at the root of all of it is complete sincerity. And to kind of boldly do that when it's so much easier and cooler to say, oh, hey, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing and I'm making fun of this. I don't actually believe what I'm doing. That's guts.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're describing also goes to his ability as a director to work with actors. Like an actor has to trust you to go there and not put on that ironic tilt to it just to save face or something. They must have a confidence in him that he brings to the work and to the collaboration. And they, a lot of the actors who've worked with him have talked about that.
Yeah.
So I'm not making this up from just watching it and assuming, but I do think it's a testament, though. What you're saying is a testament to that ability of his to get an actor to buy in.
Yeah.
And live in that world that is, I don't want to say ill-defined, that's not the right word, but is not as defined as maybe a Christopher Nolan or something.
Yeah, I mean, with a fairly, from all accounts, a fairly limited amount of direction. Or it's the direction is equally abstract, right? More wind in this one, right? And this apparently what one bit of direction he would give actors, and all of them having their own read on the movie, right? Like I guess I think there's something where Patricia Arquette was talking about in Lost Highway trying to, so I'm asking him, I think, am I the same person? Am I two different people? What am I? And all of that, and him not telling her. And so she's got her, like the thing they tell you in film school, right, is just make sure that you're all making the same movie. And I think everyone does that figuratively on his work, but literally they might have completely different reads on what is actually happening in the scene that they're doing. And yet they have to collaborate and they still have to play together and make it come off in a way that's emotionally true. And that's kind of wild to be able to get them, one, like the actor, to trust, like, you're not going to make me look like an idiot. I'm going to go for something and try it. And two, to just be what I'm going for and what you're going for are maybe completely different movies, or they are incongruous in some other way, and it's going to come together somehow.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense, too, to go back to your point about, like, there can be 30 different completely valid interpretations of a movie. Doesn't that mean that the people interpreting the story to make the movie have room then for their own interpretations? So, it's wild that it works. I mean, it just is. It just is.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we don't have a ton of people who work like this, right? Because it's so risky, and and I don't know. I mean, I guess an interesting question would be if he hadn't made a movie with 5 people, in a garage for a few years, would he have been able to pull something like that off without starting in that kind of really, really independent sort of system with really, really trusted people, so that then he has a proof of concept to show to other people to say, look, I made something pretty great, so like now you can trust me.
Yeah. And we'll get back to my conversation with Mike in just a little bit. First, I want to revisit that email I mentioned earlier in the show and read from, that I got from my friend Andrea De Felice, and I want to share a little bit more of that now. So these are her words. I think I'll be the billionth person to say Mulholland Drive is a masterpiece. It is, but I'm not going to talk about why it is or what it means. I just want to bring up what is probably one of my favorite scenes of all time in this film and why it is. I actually prefer choosing favorite scenes rather than favorite films. And she's referring here, this is me speaking again, to the secret path scene from Mulholland Drive. And for those who aren't familiar or don't remember, it is the scene where Naomi Watts' character is being driven to a party in a limousine, and the limousine stops before she expects it to, and she's confused, and the driver says there's a surprise, and then Laura Herring's character shows up and walks Naomi Watts through the woods to their house. So that's the scene she's referring to, and now back to her words. I think it's a perfect, heartbreaking portrayal of a blissful, microsecond edge of being loved, a part of something, trusted, and you feel it even though you are not them. It's this short yet slow seductive ascension on a cliff that represents, from analysis, the whole allure of Hollywood, point of no return, dangers beneath the surface, etc. For me, it's one of the most powerful scenes of pure subjectivity. You can swim in the feeling of the moment. It's actually really fucking heartbreaking. And that element is perfection. I love filmmakers that know how to design sound. Now I'll skip ahead a little bit to the end of her email. Tonight, when I checked my streaming apps to see how much Lynch had been added, I thought about how many people who don't know much of his work will now watch because he's dead. That's a thing and it's fine, but I kind of hope people will also seek out his interviews. He was always easy to listen to. He didn't want to talk about what a film he made meant. He wouldn't offer bridges to make sense of other countless analyses. I admired that and thought it ran parallel with what he made. So again, that was from Andrea De Felice, and I really appreciate her viewpoint here. And she is a wonderful artist who I happen to know and whose work I think maybe has an aesthetic that I could relate to Lynch. That's why I was glad to hear from her about what she thought of Lynch and his passing. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. So now we'll return to the conversation with Mike. So I'm going to kind of go on a long walk here, so bear with me.
Let's go. Let's do it.
But so I have not really a theory so much as maybe an observation that I'm trying to like kind of tease out and figure out where it goes, if it goes anywhere. So something I found myself quickly kind of backing into as I started to really think about Lynch's impact after his passing was, for some reason, in comparison with Steven Spielberg. And basically, I got there by thinking about how the term Lynchian, quote unquote, has come into being. And the only other major filmmaker of Lynch's generation whose name I ever really hear people use as an adverb might be Spielberg. You know, I hear people say something is Spielbergian. They use it to describe, you know, certain types of filmmakers and their work. But in my mind, so much of what could be called Spielbergian might actually be something taken from like Alfred Hitchcock or John Ford or David Lean and filtered through Spielberg. And I think Lynch just manages to overcome his influences more than Spielberg or other contemporaries. And that's not a knock on them. It's just a different way of being. Or maybe it's just that the way he filters his influences just leaves the traces of them so much less obvious in some way. But do you think there's anything to that? Am I going anywhere with this?
Well, I mean, I think it is an interesting, to put the two of those filmmakers in conversation with each other, I think is really interesting to sort of what is it about their aesthetics that have earned them this, this term, basically. I think that with Lynch's work, it depends on the movie, but I think particularly if you're looking at the Blue Velvet, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive kind of group, the Hitchcock, Billy Wilder sort of Rear Window, Vertigo, Sunset Boulevard, kind of influences are they're very palpably there. But to your point, they don't feel derivative in the same way. They feel much more like these are ideas that he recognizes have some power, and that he wants to, like you said, filter them through his own point of view, to the point where I guess, and maybe where I would part ways with you slightly, to the point where you can still sort of see the tracks. You can see where it's coming from, but it does not in any way feel derivative in the way that, and I don't agree with this point either, in the way that people will describe what Brian De Palma does as being derivative of Hitchcock, or the way that, maybe something like in Tarantino's work might somehow feel derivative or just a reference to something else, or the way that the haters will describe Wild at Heart as just, this is just pointing at stuff, I think that he manages to, and maybe it's because it's the jumping off point, it's not the end, those references or those ideas, and two, maybe he's just choosing very, very well, right? How could you possibly exhaust what Vertigo or Sunset Boulevard have to offer? Those movies themselves don't get exhausted, but then the ideas of doubles or people sort of feeding off each other, or the blurring of the imaginary and the real, those things they're never going to get exhausted. So there's room for Billy Wilder to do that, and there's room for David Lynch to do it.
I guess another way of me sort of framing it might be that I feel like with Lynch, and again, I'm not trying to knock Spielberg when I talk about this, but I feel like with Lynch, he's almost going back to the same concept that inspired Hitchcock and doing his take on that. He's not doing his take on Hitchcock. Or at least maybe there's an argument to that. Whereas with Spielberg, there are shots that I can look at and be like, he learned that from watching The Searchers, or he learned that from watching Lawrence of Arabia or something like that, and I can't necessarily, and maybe this is my own failing, look at a shot of Lynch's and just be like, I know where he took that from directly. So much as just thematically. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Well, thanks for going on that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, because I think it's a fun road, because it's a word that everyone says Lynchian and people think they know what it means. And then you suddenly say, okay, define it. And it gets way harder to do. David Foster Wallace spent 3 pages trying to describe it, and I think his definition kind of sucks in part. It's a little over the top, but maybe it boils down to what you're also talking about there with the stuff with influences and things like that. Is there's a sense of the familiar in all of it. We recognize certain things as, I've seen this before, I know where this comes from, but we are seeing it in a context that is very unfamiliar. And so that makes us more uncomfortable than if we just saw something that was unfamiliar. It's that mixing of I know the sort of the Frank Capra Town movie, that's in Blue Velvet. I know that story, or Twin Peaks. I know Leave It to Beaver, Eisenhower era America. I know what that feels like. But then to suddenly have it collide and coexist with something far darker, then you're suddenly wait, no, that's a different, I usually watch those movies separately. here they are together, and the real kick of his work is to kind of for him to say they've always been together. Right. These were all
Yeah,
you know, it's like that meme with the astronauts or whatever. Wait, you mean it's this? And the one astronaut's pointing the gun at the other one behind him in space, like always has been. Right. Like that's what
Yeah.
that's what these movies are saying. Like
Yeah.
it's like, oh God, there's this small town has some dark things going on in it that I'm just learning about. It's like they've always been there, right?
Yeah, I'm just telling you to look at them.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now when you look at, and this is where the straight story is amazing, right? Like Blue Velvet, you know, you go under the grass at the beginning and you see the Beatles, and the whole movie is about like churning all of that stuff up. The straight story never goes down below the earth to show you that. Instead, it's all just bubbling up. That all that trauma, all that stuff it's there in the sunshine. And so the two are inextricable. They are mutually dependent. And that then suddenly all the sunshiny stuff that you thought was the comfortable, familiar stuff, now it is as dark as the dark stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like that's making me think about the straight story in a different way, though. Of like when I think of the straight story, I think of the shots at the beginning where they're looking up at the sky.
Yeah.
Him and Sissy Spacek in their yard,
Mhm.
up at the night sky,
Mhm.
I think. And then him sitting with the hitchhiker girl
Mhm.
looking at the sky again. So it's almost like the sky is it's almost things have flipped or something.
Mhm.
You know, like the sky is this place of solace,
Mhm.
and they're on the ground and they're suffering.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not even underground anymore. They're just like, it's on the surface.
Yeah.
So you got to look up to get away from
Yeah,
it.
I mean, all these pursuits of transcendence, right? Like, and then
Yeah.
when you think about like Eraserhead, The Elephant Man, Dune, The Straight Story, all begin with shots of starry skies in some way, and then you've got, and like Wild at Heart, someone descending from above, right? A good witch ex machina coming down to save Sailor and Lula. And you have, of course, Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive are these examples of people failing to transcend. And that's the tragedy of those movies, is how terrestrial they are. And I guess I can't remember if Blue Velvet ends with a tilt up to the sky or not. I don't think it does, but
I just watched it last night.
Okay. Yes, I think it just ends on that slow motion shot of Isabella Rossellini holding her child at the playground or something like that, if I'm remembering. But
that might be it. But then it goes to the like Blue Velvet.
Yeah,
like,
the drapes, right?
with the titles.
Yeah, but I mean, it begins, of course, with after the curtains a tilt down from the sky to the picket fence and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's all of this focus on escaping to that some sort of higher plane. And either they all yearn for that kind of transcendence in one way or another. And in some of the films, it kind of, I think, cuts like even half and half. Some of the characters achieve it and some don't. And but even in really some of the more depressing ones are the ones where they do achieve it, like Eraserhead or Firewalk with Me, right? They do get some kind of transcendence, but it's just all the awful things that happen beforehand that make it rough.
Yeah. I think you mentioned to me via email when we were kind of trying to set this up that Blue Velvet might be your favorite film of all time.
It is. Yeah.
So do you want to go just a little deeper into that? I know we've already touched on it quite a bit just now, but like, is there anything you want to share about that movie that makes it so special to you? And it might be my favorite of his works too at this point, but.
Yeah, when I was watching it in a theater the other night, or last night, trying to figure out, okay, well, wait, so I just watched these other two Lynch movies back to back, and people have been sort of asking me, okay, which one's your favorite and why? And then I'm suddenly like having these self-doubts, like, wait, is this my favorite movie? Or wait, why do I like this one better? So I was preparing for this, asking myself this question. Spoiler alert, I didn't really arrive at an answer per se. I think one thing about it is it gets at what movies do and what they're for. That journey into another world, you're on the outside looking in, but then you discover the movie's looking back at you and telling you that the thing you are looking at is actually yourself. That stuff where you think you're in an escapist world and then you're still at home. You never left, right? The call's coming from inside the house, all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So there's some of that I think that's going on in it. Another thing I find the way that so much of the tone of that movie refuses to resolve itself. Like, is the ending a happy ending? Or the thing I think is fascinating that's really uncorked the movie for me in some interesting ways is the film scholar Todd McGowan talks about how there's fantasy going on in Blue Velvet, but what we call the normal world, like the world of Lumberton, he's like, that's the fantasy. That's make-believe. That's a dream. And so then if you go with that, then you're looking at the end of the movie. Wait, so then is this a good thing that they're like, everything's back to normal, but aren't they really back to repression and nostalgia and all of the things that were bad about it? There's those sorts of things where I think the movie's always saying two different things at the same time. And that's just kind of endlessly fun to think about, while also being just ridiculously entertaining at every moment. And all of the categories that you sort the movie into, like, oh, this is the damaged, troubled woman, and here's the wholesome good girl. And then you go back and watch it, and like Sandy, like, is kind of like, she's down for a lot of stuff that you just don't think of. Because
she's sort of a co-instigator, if not an instigator.
Yeah, I mean, she's like,
So.
she looks at like, Jeffrey, I don't know if you're a detective or a pervert. It's like, you're the one sitting above your dad's office listening to all of the stuff to the point where you can't keep the cases straight. Like, there's something where every character who's so-called like the sunshiny version of things is, you go back and look at it and like, wait, no, they're not. Like, why do I think that? Why did I mean, they start out being like wholesome coded or whatever, but when you hear what they actually say and see what they do, it's like, wait, they're really not. And so the movie's kind of doing that all the time. And so I think if movies are going to explore, or if art really explores the collision between the way things look and the way things are, I mean, Blue Velvet's just doing that at every second and never placing you on firm ground, but also entertaining you the whole time. I think that's some of that stuff is just so great.
Yeah. And I mean, it's got Frank Booth in it too. So how can you lose?
Yeah. And Dean Stockwell, I mean, Ben, the suave Ben, man. I just,
I might be moving over to the Ben camp after this last viewing. Especially after, I just saw the 4K restoration of Paris, Texas.
Yeah.
A giant screen.
Oh, wow.
Recent months. And I have a completely new appreciation of Dean Stockwell generally because of that, I think. But that Ben character is something, man.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I think for some reason that Frank Booth was like the character that when I saw this as a teenager, I know I was like, what's this crazy guy? I gotta keep watching this, like that sort of like youthful, like anarchy. It's cool, man, kind of thing. But it's still fascinating to watch, even as I grow up and like have a life that I can kind of like track onto this movie more in a way of like having like a happy suburban life or whatever, and being able to interrogate that. The Frank Booth of it all is just like the X factor that like I can't imagine what it must have been like in 1986 to go see that movie, and then suddenly Dennis Hopper is on screen and doing what he's doing, and you're just like, what the fuck is happening now?
Yeah, well, and especially like he had been a disaster, right? He had hit rock bottom, and like here he is coming into this movie like newly sober, needing to revitalize his career. I guess it's the same thing when people saw John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, right? Like that kind of, oh wow, like this in this, like most things, like a lot of things Tarantino did, right? Like Lynch kind of did it first, right? But like that career resurrection of Hopper, that meta aspect of the film is really something else. But yeah, I mean, like thinking about seeing that movie in a I guess in a pre-Blue Velvet world is is quite. I mean, there's that joke about it in in The Squid and the Whale, the Noah Baumbach movie, where they're talking. There's this. It's just a little bit, but they're talking about going to a movie. It's like Jesse Eisenberg and I think he's dating Anna Paquin in the movie, and Jeff Daniels is the dad. And they're like, "Oh, we're thinking of going to a movie."
Also, kind of dating her.
He winds up. Yeah, I think it's before that happens. But they're sitting there like, "Oh, we're thinking of going to a movie or whatever." And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's this movie Blue Velvet. It's supposed to be interesting." Hard cut to he put his disease in me. And you're just like imagining like taking your going to see this movie with like your parents and a girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. And just like, oh yeah, let's just go check this movie out, and then wham, this like I think even now people aren't really prepared for it, even still, because you're in this like, it's this movie where it's like, oh, it's kind of hokey, and there's these things going on in town, and there's like a little bit of mystery, and then out of nowhere, the devil himself shows up and takes over the movie, and it is. You suddenly have no idea where the movie's going to go. And really, like every moment of the movie after his arrival becomes up for grabs. Like every rule you think is in the movie is gone now because there's someone like this in it. Like this is really frightening. Even the most mundane stuff in the movie after that point is really unsettling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's underrated how much we live in a world, at least in terms of like cinema and television, that David Lynch either created or wholly put his stamp on.
Yeah.
Like there's pre him and after him,
Yeah. I mean, same thing with like Blade Runner, right? Or something like that. There's just certain works that, they are so clearly, they just have become part of the DNA of everything, whether they're consciously doing it or not.
Yeah. But I think just between like him having those works like Blue Velvet and Frank Booth, and then I don't think you get from Twin Peaks to like Sopranos, The Wire, any of the like golden age so-called of television that came like 10 years later. I don't think you get any of that without Twin Peaks. Not saying something else couldn't have done it, but it was Twin Peaks that did it. It's just like I said, I think he's a little underrated for how much he did influence because he was the one who did it.
Yeah. And I think like to something you were, I think when you were reading your friend's email, there are lots of other artists who maybe do similar things to what he's done with the level of what he's doing, like both domestically and internationally. But he did it on network television.
Yeah.
The way that he was able to take his sensibility and package it into lowest common denominator era for network programming is very difficult to fully appreciate.
Yeah.
And to do it in a way that doesn't feel watered down, doesn't feel like, oh yeah, I can kind of see how he's not really, going all out here. When you get to the final episode of season 2 of Twin Peaks, that might be some of his most formally ambitious work that he has done. And as ambitious and complicated as anything on Twin Peaks: The Return, and it was on ABC on like a Thursday night. I mean, it's like a Eraserhead level strange and upsetting, and it's just on TV. Like not even on HBO or like it's not on cable or anything. And that and so the thing is, like, so you have that, and you have simply that then becomes part of the water. Right? Like that's in the ecosystem at that point. If it's like that on ABC, then like it's everywhere after that. And how do you separate out the stylistic quirks of things that come after it? How can you tell which part comes from Twin Peaks or what doesn't, when it's like it's all of it, right?
Yeah. I think at least once every episode, I at least think, and have often said out loud, and my wife has done the same, we're like, how was this on TV then? Like, what did someone think seeing this after watching, like, even LA Law, which was like groundbreaking for the time, but this, like, I feel like Twin Peaks just upped the level so much in terms of just at least presenting something that was different on television, and opening up that little bit of a gap that all these other things could kind of eventually make their way through and expand. You know, it's just kind of, I can't imagine what it was like before it in a way.
I tried to, one semester at Loyola, I taught a Lynch-focused class, and the first thing, before we did Twin Peaks, the first thing I asked them to watch was, I gave them a list of like the top 10 shows on television in 1989 and 1990. It was like, pick an episode of any of these shows and watch one. And it was like A Different World, Family Matters, Roseanne, maybe like, I don't think Picket Fences was one of them. And there were some dramas in there, but like, just like you have, like, just to see, because otherwise, you go into watching Twin Peaks when you've seen like True Detective or something like that. It's still going to feel different and impactful, but you kind of have to see, well, what were they watching the week before this came on? Now, what do you get? And I think too, but at the same time, like, why does some of it work so well? Like, it's a soap opera. You know, so much of it is soap opera. And I also, like, this was my thing watching The Sopranos. I'm like, this is a soap opera. Like, that's what this is. But it's like, for people who would say they never watch soap operas, like, you don't say that about me, or whatever. But it's using it's taking all these Lynchian things, but it's also taking all these things that are very much the basics of soap daytime television, and then you put them together, and that's suddenly like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah. We'll hear the rest of my conversation with Mike here in just a little bit, but first let's hear one last message from a friend of the podcast. This one is from Michelle Brundage, who herself is an editor who works largely in television, and she was also a special guest on a series of episodes of the Stereoactive Movie Club.
My introduction to David Lynch was Blue Velvet. I was 17. My friend and I had rented it on VHS and watched it in his living room after his parents had gone to bed. I remember sitting in the darkness, eyes glued to the TV, feeling as if I was being pulled into a different realm, somewhere dark and dangerous, yet alluring and sophisticated. I'm sure this also made my small-town teenage self very uncomfortable. This movie was deeply unsettling and frightening in a way I'd never experienced before. Needless to say, my teenage psyche was hooked. Perhaps my story could describe all of our introductions to David Lynch. Over the years, as I went on to consume more Lynch, I became enamored with not only the darkness, but the light in his work, the humor and the humanity, his exploration of the duality of life and of time as an infinite loop, bringing back moments we're destined to live through again and again, often leaving us devastated and with questions left unanswered. And now, knowing that David Lynch is physically gone from this world, this is how we are left, devastated and wondering, what more could we have gotten to experience from him had he lived and worked longer? Unanswerable. But lucky for us, he also left us with the infinite loop of his work to live through again and again. To re-watch our first Lynch film, as I recently did with Blue Velvet, and to feel as if it's the first time. To revisit the town of Twin Peaks and Club Silencio, and to ride from Iowa to Wisconsin on a lawnmower again. To live in all of the gorgeous sound and imagery, the pain and the beauty, the darkness and the light. Thank you, David Lynch, for all of it. You are incredibly missed.
Kind of back to the idea of Lynchian. What are you seeing in the world that is Lynchian to you that you enjoy? Like, what films, what filmmakers, what television, anything, I guess. Yeah. What do you like?
Well, I'm going to stump for my American movie of the decade. I saw The TV Glow that came out this year. Jane Schoenbrun's work, both that one and We're All Going to the World's Fair, the debut, like an Eraserhead level assured debut, I think. Their work is amazing to me, and I think is something that you can tell that there is a deep devotion to Lynch, but in the same way that you can tell Lynch is deeply devoted to Billy Wilder and Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah.
But or Jacques Tati or Fellini, you can see the lineage, but in no way does it feel like they're not doing something completely and totally new.
Right.
And I found those two films to just be exhilarating, and very much coming out of very, very Lynchian, but also something that we need to invent a new adjective for, Schoenbrun-esque or whatever.
That is part of it, though. His name lends itself easily to being turned into an adverb. Right. It's very easy.
Yes, that does help. Yeah. And that's something, he doesn't have, none of us have control over, right? Yeah. But yeah, that's true. So, I mean, that's the thing the work that jumps to mind immediately.
Well, I'll say about, I saw The TV Glow. I really want to watch that again. I really enjoyed it the first time. I don't know if I got to that same level. But I definitely, but that's like the way it is for any David Lynch movie or any of the filmmakers I really love. Like, I have to see it again to really get the full impact. So
yeah, the first time doesn't even count, really.
Yeah. I look forward to taking that one in again and seeing the first film of theirs. But I don't know if this is exactly a fit, but I think there's something connective to it. Sorry to Bother You.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Just in that it does rely on dream logic, I feel like. But it's in no way subtle.
Right.
In a way that Lynch can be when he wants to be. I don't know that.
Well, no, and I think that's an interesting choice too, to pick something that is tonally so very different, right? And is satire, and I think that's really interesting to see where those, because I think a lot of the things that will steer toward Lynchian are going to be thought of as very dark and all that, and forgetting that a lot of his stuff is very funny. And there's things in it that are funny. I mean, I think certainly early Coen Brothers stuff, where I'm thinking like these sort of Barton Fink Miller's Crossing, Raising Arizona, like those movies have a distinct, and even Fargo all have a really distinct debt to Lynch. I mean, in the earlier days, they shared. Ben Barenholtz made both of them, right? Who distributed Eraserhead and Raised in Arizona, and I think also Blood Simple. So like they are kind of coming out of the same training camp, I guess, or the same stable. But I think there's certainly the way that they, more so in their early work than in their more recent stuff, the way that they hold on things for a really long time to draw out the strangeness feels very much like it's something that's coming from Eraserhead. Yeah. They play around with that less so now, but in their early work, I think you can really see that sort of stuff happening. I mean, I guess another one, and maybe this is an obvious one, but like Donnie Darko, I think is certainly. I mean, I just had a student who's a really big fan of that movie asking, well, what David Lynch movie should I start with? I'm like, well, if you like Donnie Darko, then you need to see Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive probably first, right? Those would be the most lined up with each other.
Well, maybe there's something to A Different Man. Did you see that?
I have not seen that movie yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think it's an obvious one, but the way the movie sort of has a slight ambiguity, to my mind at least, about its reality. I think probably stems a little bit from Lynch, or at least the world he's created for us to live in. But it's not like a clear one-to-one type of thing in a way that I think, like, as singular as it is on its own, I Saw the TV Glow. Like, it's hard to watch I Saw the TV Glow and not think of Lynch at least a little bit, not to take away from it in any way.
No.
Kind of stemming from that, are there particular works on Lynch and his work or interviews with him, that sort of thing, that you've come across in your own research that you'd recommend to folks who want to really dig in beyond just watching his film and TV work?
Okay, yeah. So one of the challenges with digging into his work is you get the psychoanalytic film critics really have a field day with him for obvious reasons, right? The Lacanians have set up shop in his work and done a lot of and done some good work with it. I mean, I think that's where Todd McGowan's book is kind of living, and Zizek's thing on Lost Highway. But I really liked Martha Nachenson's book, The Passion of David Lynch, Wild at Heart in Hollywood. That one, it comes out right after Lost Highway. So it doesn't, she's written a second book that covers the works after that, but I really prefer the first one. I think that one's probably my favorite of the ones that I was looking at. And there's a really cool collection from like Wallflower Press called like The Cinema of David Lynch, American Dreams, Nightmare Visions, or something like that. I'm staring at it, but it's like too far away for me to see what the actual title is. But that one's got some cool essays. That's an edited collection of stuff that I think has some really good things in it that approach the works from a few different angles. But yeah, I mean, there's like tons of like articles and things like that to look at rather than just, book length stuff. And then I really liked Room to Dream. I thought that was a really fun book to read, the sort of the memoir / biography that he does with Kristen McKenna. Oh, and Dennis Lim has this very short book called The Man from Another Place that came out in like 2015, I think. And that one, it's maybe 150 or 200 pages, but like a smaller sized book. People can't see the shape I'm making, but just picture a
kind of like a
smaller
33
book.
and a third.
Yeah, a little bit bigger than that, but yes, like a standard kind of looking paperback size, or a little, rather than like the bigger academic kind of book sizes. That one is really good. Lim's a great writer, and it does some very cool stuff on Lynch that I really like. But yeah, and every single one of them has a different angle that you can either vibe with or not, and that's fine, right? I mean, that was kind of the thing where part of me was like, oh God, does the world really need another David Lynch book? And I mean, the answer is probably no, right? But I mean, need is such a strong word, but is there room for another one? Always. And so that was sort of what I had to, but then I also had to kind of figure out, okay, what am I doing something different from what the other ones are doing? And if so, how and why? And, I guess that's up to other people to answer, but I felt like it was something different enough to justify doing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to that point, I know we haven't really been talking about your book, but do you want to kind of give a quick overview of the book for people in case they are interested?
Yeah, so it is looking at different literary and musical traditions that Lynch's work taps into, and sort of pairing films with those traditions to see how we can see the traces of it in his work, and then see what he does with it, and then see how other artists who aren't filmmakers, a writer and a musician, do the same thing with his work that he's doing with other people's work. So the literary traditions are things like the fiction of Nathaniel West, and looking at Mulholland Drive as an extension of that, looking at Blue Velvet as a work of children's literature, even though it's definitely not for children, but it essentially is the same story as Where the Wild Things Are, and they express similar ideas.
Oh, yeah.
And then for like the real heads, there's looking at Cormac McCarthy's treatment of the atomic bomb test and Twin Peaks: The Returns, episode 8. The musical stuff is like Wild at Heart and Rock and Roll, and Twin Peaks and teen tragedy ballads, the straight story and folk music, cover songs in Lost Highway. It's kind of fascinating when you realize that there are 3 covers in Lost Highway that are used very prominently in the movie, and then you've got this thing about like a person turning into someone else and doppelganger stuff. I'm like, how is this not something people have talked about? And then I look at how David Foster Wallace and Lana Del Rey both use Lynch's work to create their own artistic personas, and particularly how they use Laura Palmer as like a central figure, an archetype for the stuff that they do. And yeah, so I mean, that's the basic kind of gist of it, is just looking at like associative kind of readings of his movies that I hope open up other sorts of ways to think about them and to see just how much they are in dialogue with post-war American culture, and really trying to arrive at an overview of like, well, what the heck are we since 1985? And I think by looking at his American set works pretty closely, you can get a sense of a pretty coherent view of American culture and the American imagination since the atomic bomb.
Yeah. And of course, we'll link to the book in the show notes for this episode because we want people to go check it out. So I appreciate you kind of telling people about it. It definitely sounds to me like you found spaces to explore that I don't know that they'd been explored. You would know better than me at this point, but it sounds very interesting. I look forward to checking it out myself. So,
thank you. Yeah.
And do you have any final thoughts on Lynch that you want to share that are just like kind of burning a hole in your pocket?
No, I mean, I think there's, I guess the best thing is that there is not going to be a final thought on Lynch. In some ways, we're just getting started. He's not among us as a walking person, but the work is still very much with us, and we're really only starting to wrap our heads around it. And so I think it's no final thought, because there's a lot more to come.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents. And thanks again to our guest, Mike Miley. Again, his book is called David Lynch's American Dreamscape, Music, Literature, Cinema. And it's available February 6th from Bloomsbury Academic. Thank you also to the wonderful contributors who helped out with this episode. Matt Tyson, who you heard first. Then you heard a reading of something written by Andrea De Felice. And finally, you heard a message from Michelle Brundage. And I will check and see what links we have for them and share anything I can in the show notes for this episode if you want to check out their work. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVeigh. If you like what you hear in the show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience, and it is much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Again, every little bit helps, and it is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com, and you can find more information about this show and everything else that Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com. And I'll just say this, because I haven't said it on the show yet that I can recall. We're now on Blue Sky.
Kind of embarrassing.
Go ahead.
I had a dream about this place.
Oh boy.
See what I mean?
Okay. So you had a dream about this place. Tell me.
Well, it's the second one I've had, but they're both the same. They start out that I'm in here, but it's not day or night. It's kind of half night, you know? But it looks just like this, except for the light. And I'm scared like I can't tell you. Of all people, you're standing right over there. By that counter. You're in both dreams. And you're scared. I get even more frightened when I see how afraid you are, and then I realize what it is. There's a man in back of this place. He's the one who's doing it. I can see him through the wall. I can see his face. I hope that I never see that face ever outside of a dream. That's it.
So, you came to see if he's out there.
To get rid of this god-awful feeling.
Right then.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.